Okay, hey, it's Karie. I'm really sorry about the delay in getting to you guys today. This week's been really rough, and I'm having a ton of computer problems. And it's not really fun dealing with these things totally alone during a pandemic. So, again, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get it all fixed. Hopefully, hopefully it'll get fixed soon. But in the meantime, I'm going to try this on my iPad. I can't see if you guys can even see this or if it's even working. I hope that it is. So, okay, it looks like some people are watching. Okay. Thank goodness. All right. Again, sorry for the delay. I'm going to talk about a lot of things today because I figure if McDonald's can supersize things, why can't I? By the way, I'm having really bad sinus problems, so just please ignore my frequent blowing my nose. Anyway, there is a lot to talk about. I frequently like to observe anniversaries of things because that's kind of fun. And this past week, let's see, marked the 85th anniversary of the Griffith Observatory. If some of you have been to Los Angeles, I'm sure you've probably been to the Griffith Observatory. The observatory came about because of a resident at Hollywood Forever, and that's Griffith J. Griffith. Mr. Griffith was a businessman. He made a fortune in mines speculating. He was extraordinarily wealthy, and he donated 3,015 acres to the city of Los Angeles with the condition it had to be a public park for everybody to enjoy, which is how we got Griffith Park. Now, Mr. Griffith had some issues. We all have our issues in life, but his were big. He was an alcoholic and he was extremely paranoid. I don't know what the diagnosis would be in our world today, but he somehow got it into his head that his wife was conspiring with the Pope to assassinate him. So his wife said, you know what, you've been working really hard. I think we need a vacation. So they took a vacation in Santa Monica. They went to a hotel. During this time, Mr. Griffith's paranoia spiraled further and further out of control. One day on their trip, they went back to their hotel room. He got extremely drunk, pulled out a gun, and ordered his wife to get down on her knees by the bed, which she did. He walked up to her, put the gun to her head, pulled the trigger. Now, I don't know if she jerked her head back or what, but the bullet lodged into her eyeball. She would lose an eyeball, and 50% of her face would be badly disfigured. But she lived. And this is 1903, by the way, so think about where medicine was in 1903. This is one very serious miracle. Now, suffice to say, this kind of put an end to the marriage. Fair enough, as these things are wont to do. Mr. Griffith must have had the legal dream team of the day because he pled alcoholic insanity in his defense. He only served 2 years in San Quentin, and he was a free man. He got out of prison wanting to assume what he felt was his rightful place in Los Angeles high society. But if people didn't like him a lot before the whole getting drunk and shooting your wife in the head thing, you can only imagine how people felt about him afterward. They wanted nothing to do with him. Well, Mr. Griffith wanted to donate $100,000 to build the Griffith Observatory. The city declined his offer, and the money was set aside. Mr. Griffith finally died in 1919, and after years of things going on, in 1931 they finally appropriated that money to start construction on the observatory. So it was underway by about 1931. It opened in 1935, so this week marked the 85th anniversary of the Griffith Observatory. And Mr. Griffith obviously was a troubled and flawed man, but did give the city some amazing things. And the observatory is really one of the most iconic and beautiful jewels in the city of Los Angeles. It's been featured in tons of movies. It's open to the public. Well, I don't know if it is right now, but it usually is. And it's got incredible views of the city. It really is one of LA's jewel locations, and we are so incredibly fortunate to have it. So this week marked the 85th anniversary of that. Also, this week, actually as of today, May 16th, marks the anniversary of the very first Academy Awards ceremony. The very first Academy Awards happened on May 16th of 1929 at the Roosevelt Hotel in the heart of Hollywood. The first ceremony was in the Blossom Room at the Roosevelt. The awards were handed out. By the way, the recipients already knew they were winners and were told 3 months in advance. So there was no suspense on that big night. Not even a lot of photos documenting that big night, surprisingly. And it would become, of course, the first of the annual tradition of the Academy Awards. And we do have several key Academy founders at Hollywood Forever. In fact, Douglas Fairbanks, the first president of the Academy Awards, Cecil B. DeMille, Jesse Lasky, and screenwriters Carrie Wilson and Jeannie McPherson. And the very first Academy Award winner, Best Actress, Janet Gaynor. Janet Gaynor won the Best Actress Oscar basically for 3 movies: F.W. Murnau's Sunrise, Street Angel, and Seventh Heaven. And again, she was told of her win in advance. There was no hype, no suspense. It wouldn't be the big source of, worldwide hoopla that it is today. And when asked what it felt like to take home the statuette, Janet later said, "Well, I was real excited to meet Mr. Fairbanks." So things have certainly changed a lot since then. But I'm really glad that we still have the Roosevelt Hotel, still have the Blossom Room, and that piece of Hollywood history is still intact. Okay. I want to answer a few of the questions that have come my way this week on Facebook and email. First off, I do have some exciting news for you. May 22nd at 5 o'clock, I've been invited by Discover Los Angeles to host a virtual tour of Hollywood Forever. It's really exciting. They do a series right now called Magic Hour. And the point behind Magic Hour is to highlight magical people and places that really make Los Angeles special. And they've had all sorts of different guests, including a recent episode. They had the 2 guys who did all the locations for La La Land, and they gave you like a virtual tour of all the locations from the film. Well, I'm going to be doing this virtually. Mainly, it's going to be through PowerPoint and photographs and my live narration. They wanted to use Google Earth. Frankly, that kind of makes me seasick. And if that makes me seasick, it might make some of you that way as well. So I'm going to actually try to maybe go down there tomorrow and shoot some video and see if I can incorporate video into it. One of the questions, the burning questions, will close-up be featured in the virtual tour? Someone emailed me that this week. My answer was, of course, his public demands it. So yes, close-up will absolutely be a part of this. And for those of you who've had technical problems with Zoom, I've also had a lot of people emailing me about Zoom. I'm not the best tech person, as you can tell by my computer struggles this past week, which have been really, really frustrating. So I would recommend maybe Googling your question about Zoom, because chances are that if you've struggled with an issue, a lot of other people have out there as well. So that would be my personal suggestion, is just look it up online, because I'm definitely not the person that can help fix computer stuff at all. Another question I've been asked this week: when is the tour coming back? That's a good question. I miss it so much. I miss my tour, my routine, my life. And I hope the tour will be back soon. Again, I think right now I'm still kind of in a wait and see mode. I'm hoping maybe in the next few weeks, the minute a decision is reached and an announcement is ready, you guys will be the first ones to know. So please stay tuned, and I will keep you posted. Okay, so all right, our star this week. I've kind of been debating about which stars to feature and highlight and so forth. And this week, I have decided to pick Fay Wray. In fact, I'm actually wearing a 1930s day dress, because Fay Wray was at her career peak during the 1930s. Fay had an interesting life. Oh my gosh, a very, very interesting life. In fact, Leonard Maltin said that he felt Fay Wray's life was far more interesting than any of the roles that she played on screen. And I definitely agree with that. Fay Wray was born in about, I think, 1907 in Canada, and had a very rough childhood mired by struggle and poverty. Her mother was mentally ill and taken to an asylum, and so she and her siblings were farmed out to other families. Eventually, they were all reunited. And when Fay was 14 years old, there was a local newspaper in, I think it was Salt Lake City, where they were at the time, that was offering a screen test to the person who could sell the most newspaper subscriptions. And so Fay Wray sort of got the movie bug at that point, entered and won the contest. So for her contest prize, she got a screen test, which basically had her sitting on a bench, smelling a bouquet of roses and looking up into the sky, thinking about how great the roses smelled. Well, the screen test was shown. It really didn't do anything, in terms of getting her any traction. But Fay Wray had several sisters, one of which had a boyfriend who was a photographer. And he talked to Fay about knowing people out in Hollywood and being able to help her get started. So, and it is surprising for the time, but yes, her mother basically let Fay go off with an older guy when she was 14 to Hollywood, seeking fame and fortune. And fortunately, it worked out. Fay stayed in a boarding house, and this guy, he was her sister's boyfriend, but he kind of became a mentor and almost, I wouldn't say a Svengali figure, but a little bit. I mean, he was kind of this guy who taught her about literature and taught her about things and tried to educate her and shape her and mold her and that kind of stuff. Well, she wound up being a comedy bit player in Christie comedies. And it wouldn't take long before Fay's beauty and looks and innate charm would be discovered. And she was eventually at Hal Roach. She became very good friends with Janet Gaynor, who I just talked about the anniversary of the Oscars. They were very close friends. Fay continued to rise up in the ranks, and in 1926, she was named a Wampus Baby Star. Wampus stands for, oh gosh, I'm going to get this wrong, right? It's basically an academy of motion picture advertisers. And every year they would name about maybe 10 to 12 young women that they would christen Wampus Baby Stars. And it was the biggest honor an aspiring starlet or ingenue could receive. And basically it meant that they'd get a tremendous amount of publicity, and they'd go off and do photo sessions and publicity stunts and all sorts of things throughout the year. And the idea was it would build up their careers, build up their name, and springboard them to bigger and better things. And the results were mixed. I've read a lot about the Wampus Baby Stars, and the class of 1926, the Wampus, that was a heck of a class. The Wampus Baby Stars included also Joan Crawford, Mary Astor, and Janet Gaynor. So some pretty legendary ladies were all in that group of young women that were just getting their launch, getting their start in 1926. Fay would sign with Paramount Pictures, and she made several silent films there, including a few with Gary Cooper, who was incredibly handsome. And Fay actually never really felt attracted to actors. She kind of thought a lot of them were pretty, but they really couldn't hold a conversation. So Fay always preferred very intellectual, erudite men. And sadly, quite a number of Fay Wray's silent films are lost. It really saddens me that we have any silents that are lost. Unfortunately, we have a ton. Probably, I think about 80% of all silent films are lost. The reason for that, many of you watching probably know the reason for that, but if you don't, the reason is they shot films on a material called cellulose nitrate back in the day. It was very flammable, combustible, it would explode, it would burn, it would turn into powder. It was a very volatile material. And also another reason is, well, there's so many reasons actually. I think studios would some studios were better about preserving their libraries than others. Some of them felt like, well, we made the film, we showed it, what are we going to do with it now? And they would burn it down and recycle the silver. Some studios would store it. Unfortunately, there were vault fires, there were all sorts of explosions. And also, some even just burned it just for the heck of it. There's a story my hero, Kevin Brownlow, told when he got his honorary Oscar. He said that in the late 20s, Carl Laemmle Jr. was trying to start a bonfire, and the fire wouldn't burn for he and his friends. And he said, oh, I know, we'll just throw some old films on it. So they threw some old silence on this fire, and nitrate fires are extremely explosive and almost impossible to put out. Anyway, I got off on track here, but long story short, several Fay Wray's silent films are lost, which is frustrating to people like myself who study this stuff, because it's frustrating to try to analyze a career and an artistic trajectory when a lot of the materials you need to study don't exist. But Fay Wray in the late 20s made a silent film. It's my favorite of her films, called The Wedding March, directed and starring Erich von Stroheim. I've been lucky enough to see this film at the San Francisco Silent Film Festival and also here in Hollywood. It's a beautiful, heartbreaking movie, and I really do hope that someday it comes on DVD. And by the way, she was 19 when she made this film. And again, it's so, so beautiful. Well, Fay continued to rise in the ranks, and by the early 1930s, sound had come in, and there were quite a few stars who didn't make the leap to sound, but a lot of them who did, and Fay Wray was one who did. And in the early 30s, she got cast in a series of horror films at Warner Brothers, including, and different studios actually, including The Vampire Bat, Dr. X, Mystery of the Wax Museum, The Most Dangerous Game, and of course, the big one everybody talks about, King Kong. Now, when she was told she was going to do King Kong, she was told she would have the darkest, most handsome man in Hollywood as her leading man. She was thinking Cary Grant. The producers were thinking a big girl. So, of course, the producers won. So, Fay started King Kong. It's really the film she's best remembered for, and she's so good in the movie. She's really the emotional core of the movie, and her bond and her love of Kong is really, and her fear of Kong, all the emotions around Kong are really kind of what drive that film and what elevated it to become the classic that it is. Fay had a very, very long career. She made films for tons of different studios, had an array of incredible leading men. But again, she never got the kind of roles she really needed to make her an even bigger star. In my humble opinion, I think she should have been having some of the roles, or some of the kind of roles that Myrna Loy had at MGM, that Claudette Colbert had, that Carol Lombard had. It's like she wasn't getting them, and she didn't have a Thalberg, or didn't have a mega producer behind her, kind of really shaping her material and creating, that kind of career that I think she should have had. Off screen, as I had mentioned, Fay Wray really loved intellectuals. Her first husband was the Oscar-winning screenwriter behind Wings, which was the first film to win the Best Picture Academy Award, and he won the Best Screenplay Oscar. He was very tall, good-looking, intellectual, and he and Fay fell in love and got married. Unfortunately, it was a very tumultuous and devastating situation. And he was an alcoholic. His name was John Monk Sanders. While a brilliant man, he was an alcoholic. He was a womanizer. He was a drug addict. And he was a lot of trouble. And he would go disappearing for lengthy periods of time where she couldn't find him. He would run off with other women. They had a daughter, and at one point he kidnapped the daughter and vanished, leading Fay to finally trying to track him down and get the authorities involved to get her daughter back to Los Angeles and get her away from his husband. And she divorced him, and then he went to a hotel room and killed himself. And it's, of course, incredibly tragic. And what sticks with me in reading about Fay Wray is not only did she go through all this incredible pain with this man and this terrible nightmare of her marriage, but she was cranking out films like crazy. She was working nonstop, 6 days a week, making movies. And you don't see it in the films. She's still beautiful, radiant. She's wonderful. And in a way, it's kind of a little similar to Judy in that this person that sparkles on screen and brings you happiness, joy, escapism in the movies is really going through a living hell behind the scenes. And I think that really speaks to her strength and her ability to kind of rise above some really painful and really terrible situations. And that to me blows my mind even more when you watch these movies and you think about what was going on behind closed doors while she was making those movies. After she divorced Saunders, she had a few other relationships with intellectual men and authors, and then she met Robert Riskin. Robert Riskin was another writer, another Oscar winner. He won the Best Screenplay Oscar for It Happened One Night, the 1934 film, to sweep the Academy Awards in all 5 major categories. By the way, that has only happened 3 times in the 92-year plus history of the Academy. The other two films to achieve that, just for trivia purposes here, are One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and The Silence of the Lambs. So, in any case, Robert Riskin was an Oscar-winning screenwriter, and he was the chief collaborator for many years and writer for Frank Capra. He worked at Columbia Pictures under Harry Cohn, who's also at Hollywood Forever. Harry Cohn definitely factors into the story a bit. In any case, she fell in love with Robert Riskin and married him. And they wound up having 2 children. And for many years, Fay kind of stayed at home and didn't make as much work in terms of films or television or anything. She sort of was semi-retired. But eventually she did come out of retirement, did work in television, and did continue to work and have a very long life and a long career. And she felt a bit frustrated later in her life that people only remembered her for King Kong when she had this substantial body of more than 80 films. But she finally came to embrace the movie and embrace Kong as simply her place in film history. And there's all sorts of cool footage of Fay Wray on YouTube, by the way. In reading about this, I found they threw a party for her on the Empire State Building because Fay Wray had an autobiography that came out at one point, and they had a whole King Kong themed party at the top of the Empire State Building, which I was like, wow, I really wish I could have been at that. That would have been fun. And Fay Wray, Robert Riskin was probably the great love of her life. They were very happy for 13 years, had 2 children, and unfortunately, tragedy once again intervened. Riskin wound up having a debilitating stroke from which he never was to recover. Fay Wray, again, went on with her life, went on with her career, married for the 3rd time to a doctor, and they were married, I think, until his death. So Fay was such an interesting woman, and the book I want to recommend to you, my quarantine reading suggestion for this week, is this book right here, Fay Wray and Robert Riskin, A Hollywood Memoir. It's written by their daughter, Victoria Riskin, and Victoria is still alive and well and with us. This book just came out recently. I was lucky enough to get an autographed copy at a screening of King Kong at the Chinese before the pandemic happened about a year or so ago. This book is excellent. It is a really deep dive into Fay Wray's family, her childhood, her career, her life, and Robert Riskin's, and Hollywood in the 1930s. So I've had a tough time putting this book down. It's a little thick, but it's so good and well worth getting. I do want to point out that my friends at Larry Edmunds in Hollywood have autographed copies by Victoria Riskin. So if you would like to get your hands on an autographed copy like mine, go to LarryEdmunds.com and you can call them or email them. Also, they can mail you books, and they can, even if you want to, you can just call them, tell them you're coming to the store, tell them what time. This is what I do. I pull up next to the store and call them, tell them I'm there, and they'll just run out and throw the books in the back seat of my car. I pay them over the phone. It works out pretty well, actually. And this book, again, it goes a lot into Harry Cohn, co-founder of Columbia Pictures, also at Hollywood Forever, and at one point Fay's boss. And the book is excellent, and I always encourage people to be really picky about what you read. Because to be honest, anyone that knows Hollywood history probably knows this pretty well. There are a lot of trashy books out there. Now, I know sometimes trashy reads can be fun. I mean, we all have our guilty pleasures. But to me, I think these people deserve the truth. They deserve to be treated with respect. And I think a lot of times trashy books don't do them justice, and they don't respect them. And that's my problem with it. When I was in college back in the mid-90s, I went to a shop in Hollywood and I bought a copy of a biography about G. Harlow by a guy named Irving Shulman. And this is before the internet, guys, mind you. So I didn't have ways to read all these book reviews about the book. I didn't know. I just saw it in a bookshop and read it. And it was a tawdry piece of complete trash. And I remember thinking, like, oh, this is so badly written. This person is portrayed so horribly in this book. And the truth is, people are complicated. And a lot of the really bad books, they're one of two things. Either the person was a complete saint and never had a flaw in the world, or the person was just a complete piece of trash. And that's a lot of the really bad books. That's kind of how they are. So I remember going back to film school that fall and complaining to my professor about how shoddy this particular book was about Jean Harlow. And my professor said, well, if you want a really good book about her, you need to read the one by David Stenn. And he pulled that off the wall, handed it to me. I read it. I think I read it in one sitting because it's that compulsively readable and good. And after that, it was a brilliant biography. It's still one of my favorites. And after that, I was officially schooled in the difference between a really bad biography and a really, really good one. And I also am of the mind that truth is always going to be stranger than fiction. So to me, the truth is better. It is more fascinating than the lies. And also, as I said, I think people deserve the truth. Because, yes, these people were movie stars, but they were people. They had children and families and lives and careers. And they were human beings. And they deserve to be treated with kindness and respect and with accuracy and with integrity. So anyway, that's my soapbox. But that's the reason I always say, be picky. Look at how many resources are documented in the back of the book. Research notes. Go online and read reviews. Talk to tons of different film history experts. There's tons of us online. Ask what book if you're not sure. But I always advocate for trying to get your hands on the best possible books you can about these people. I also want to put it in a plug. There are some Fay Wray movies on DVD, of course, King Kong, but there's a new one I really want to draw your attention to, and it's The Mystery of the Wax Museum. It was made, I think, the same year as Kong, in about, I think, 33. And it was directed by Michael Curtiz, who would go on to direct Casablanca, Mildred Pierce, Yankee Doodle Dandy, tons of classic films. And it's an excellent horror film from that time. And it just came out on Blu-ray, and the beloved friends at the UCLA Archive were behind this. Also, my friend and Michael Curtiz expert Alan Rohde. And I hear the DVD is fantastic. They've done a beautiful restoration. And by the way, Mystery of the Wax Museum is a very early color film, too, in the horror genre. So if you want some entertainment on DVD during the pandemic, Mystery of the Wax Museum from the early 30s, is available now on DVD. In fact, my copy is literally on the way as we speak. And for me, it's another great Fay Wray film. And for those of you who love vintage fashion as much as I do, there's some really beautiful outfits in the movie as well. And it's very entertaining. And even for the time, a little bit shocking. There's a scene at the end where, I don't want to give everything away, where Fay Wray sort of hits the evil guy and the wax just falls off his face. So it's a really cool, inventive movie from that time period, and I highly, highly recommend it. Also, Fay Wray, it actually talks about Hollywood Forever in this book, because when Fay Wray was getting older, she decided in advance she wanted to be at Hollywood Forever. She said that in her early days of Hollywood, she lived near the cemetery, and that's where she wanted to be. And so Fay is not too far from the pond, and she had a sister she was very close to throughout her life named Willow. And she asked that a willow tree be planted above her grave to kind of watch over her grave. So she has a little bench, a willow tree, and a plaque on the ground. There's even a Fay Wray fan club. I'll have to look up the footage on my computer, but I shot a little video because a while back they left a gorilla that whistles whenever anyone walks by and a banana on the grave. So there's a little whistling gorilla doll and a banana at one point on the grave. And again, I think Fay Wray had, as Leonard Maltin said again, a fascinating life. I mean, I feel like I could sit here for hours and talk to you about it, but this book, what I've said barely covers the tip of the iceberg, but this book is really, really fantastic, and I highly, highly recommend it. Okay, so that's my talk about Fay Wray. Also, the update on Close Up, because to be honest with you, most of the emails I do receive, I'd like to know what's going on with Close Up. So here's the Close Up update. First off, for those of you who need more pandemic entertainment, there's a YouTube channel by a friend named Arthur Dark. It's called Hollywood Graveyard. He explores cemeteries all over the place. And it's really excellent. He does a fantastic job. And he featured Close Up and I in his Animal Grave video. And I also play myself in his Twilight Zone video. I like to joke I'm an Arthur Dark featured player at this point. But I recently hung out with Arthur and introduced him to Close Up. So they have met, and I even posted a picture of it on the page this week. Also, there's a photographer. Some of you may have seen the picture. If not, I'll repost it. Her name is Diana Lundeen. And I became a fan of hers online. I'm a diehard film noir junkie. And she does this thing. She's a pet portrait photographer. And she takes these photos of, she calls them dog noir or cat noir. And she takes photographs of people in very film noir locations with a film noir style with their pet. And I just started out, I wrote her basically a fangirl email just saying, I'm like obsessed with your work. I love it. It's great. And then she offered to photograph me and my black Labrador, but sadly he was sick and passed away. But then when Close Up kind of came into the scene, she said, well, I want to do a session with you and Close Up. So we did a session with Close Up and I. The day we shot it, pre-pandemic, it was kind of rainy and cloudy, and we were sort of debating if we should even do it or not, but we did. And right when she was taking the photo, all these storm clouds sort of kind of forming behind these palm trees, and it looked so cinematic. It was just perfect. So we got a great shot, and I decided to pay further tribute to one of my favorites, Jean Tierney. I wore a white satin 40s gown, so it was just such a great shot of Close-Up's black shiny fur and me in the white gown. And I'll post that as well because it makes me smile. It's so cool. And another thing that kind of cheers me up during the pandemic, I'm a big animal lover. I love animals so much. And I saw this video or these photos about a lady who owns a black cat and she dressed it up in all these costumes and outfits. I thought that was so cool. But the truth is, if I tried that with Close Up, it would probably end with my losing a tremendous amount of blood. Maybe even dying. And I don't think Close Up would like that. Close Up is a very sweet cat, but his patience is of a limited nature. And when that patience runs out, it's run out. So, I will not be dressing Close Up in outfits, even though that would be cool. He would be so mad. Another lady emailed me this week with a link to an apartment that accepts cats. But again, I say this again, Close Up loves his life at the cemetery. He would be so unhappy in any kind of apartment. He would literally run out the door the second I had to take out the trash or something, because Close Up, he's a free spirit. And again, he looks healthy, happy, shiny. He's got people checking on him. He's living his absolute best life. And anybody who's met him will absolutely tell you that as well. So, after I log off of this, what I'm going to do, I'm going to post a photo of the Fay Wray book. You can order it online, but again, I really recommend ordering from Larry Edmunds. And they have autographed copies, which is super extra cool. So I'll post a picture of the book. I'm going to post several links, too, about the history of the Academy Awards, since today marks the anniversary of the very first Oscar ceremony, May 16th, 1929. The other day, I posted a link to my friend and collaborator, Mary Mallory, and a blog she wrote about the history of the Griffith Observatory. And I'll post all sorts of fun content for you guys after I log off here and hopefully get some computer issues fixed. But I did want to remind you again, May 22nd at 5 o'clock on the West Coast time, I will be doing a live virtual tour of the cemetery. It's going to be abbreviated because my normal tour is 2.5 full hours. And frankly, I can't do it for the virtual tour that long. They've asked me to keep it to 45 minutes plus a Q&A afterward. So it won't be as long as usual, but I'm going to kind of put some different stuff into it. I've got some archival photos of the cemetery I'm going to use, some aerial photos. I'm going to kind of make it a little bit different of an experience for people, which I think is going to be fun. And by the way, if you happen to miss it or you're in a different time zone, don't worry about it, because I'm pretty sure that people at Discover Los Angeles are going to make it available on their website so you can go to it anytime. I'll definitely post links to it as well, so don't worry about that. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm actually really looking forward to it. So if you guys have questions or comments or requests, you can feel free to leave them on this page. You can email me. And really, I just want to say again, thank you for your support. I mean, I've had so many kind words, and it really helps me because I live alone. It's a pandemic. It's really, really stressful. And meet new friends all around the world that love Hollywood history. That's been a lifeline for me these days. So thank you so much for tuning in. So I hope you enjoyed my talk about Fay Wray. And if you're like me, you can't get enough Hollywood history, I would encourage you when you log off. Let's see, what time is it? Let's see. Okay, it's almost 1 p.m. To join the Catalina Island Museum. Last week or so, I did an Instagram event with them to celebrate Valentina's 125th birthday. At 1 o'clock today, they're going to do a silent film event, and they're going to show a silent film virtually called Sips at Sea, and it was actually shot in Catalina on the island in the 1920s. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And tomorrow at 1 o'clock, they're going to have a lecture about Valentino's first ring. So I encourage you to watch those online if you are in any position to do so, to support the museum. The island has had tremendously hard times because of this pandemic, because almost everybody on the island works in tourism. So the museum people are great, the island is great, and I do hope after the pandemic that people will visit there. But yeah, so I'm going to sign off. If you want more silent film or more Hollywood content, log on to Catalina Film Museum. Thank you guys for bearing with me after my technical problems. I apologize. It's been a hard week. And if you missed part of this talk, don't worry. I'm going to repost it, and I will repost it to YouTube, and it will definitely be easy to find. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward